The German plan for Kursk depended on two attacks acting like one machine. From the north, German forces would drive down from the Orel region toward the Soviet-held salient. From the south, other German forces would push upward from the Belgorod and Kharkov area. The aim was to meet behind the Soviet armies around Kursk, cut them off, and turn the bulge from an apparent Soviet strength into a trap. This is why the battle has to be understood as more than a single armored collision. Kursk was a coordinated pincer operation, and a pincer is only as strong as its weaker arm. If one side stalled while the other advanced, the whole design would begin to lose meaning. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The northern and southern attacks looked similar on a simple map, but they were not identical in terrain, forces, or prospects. In the north, the German Ninth Army, under General Walter Model, faced a heavily prepared Soviet defensive zone held by Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front. Model was a tough and cautious commander, known for his defensive skill and attention to battlefield detail. He understood that his troops were not advancing into open country, but into a fortified belt built to slow them from the first hours. The northern attack had to punch through dense defenses and keep moving south. Yet every minefield, every strongpoint, and every Soviet artillery plan threatened to turn that movement into a crawl.
In the south, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's Army Group South had a different opportunity and a different danger. The main armored blow there would be delivered by powerful formations, including the 4th Panzer Army under Hermann Hoth and Army Detachment Kempf, attacking from the Belgorod area toward the northern and northeastern routes into the salient. This southern thrust had more room to develop and would eventually make deeper progress than the northern attack. German commanders hoped that the south might produce the decisive penetration if the northern arm did its part. But that hope also created pressure. If the southern forces drove forward while the north failed, the southern spearheads could find themselves advancing into depth without the encirclement that was supposed to give the operation its purpose. The Soviet command understood this relationship between the two arms of the German attack. The Red Army did not need to stop every German unit at the first trench in order to defeat Operation Citadel. It needed to prevent the two pincers from meeting and to make the German advance consume more time and strength than Germany could afford. In the north, Rokossovsky's defenses were meant to lock Model into a grinding battle before he could gather momentum. In the south, Nikolai Vatutin's Voronezh front had to withstand a more dangerous armored push that might bend the defenses more sharply. Behind them, deeper reserves waited for commitment when the main German effort became clear. The Soviet system was built around the expectation that the attacks would not develop evenly. The northern face became a test of whether German method could survive Soviet preparation. Model's forces included experienced troops, armor, artillery, and engineers, but they faced a battlefield that had been deliberately thickened against them. Minefields disrupted routes. Anti-tank guns covered likely approaches. Soviet infantry held fortified villages and fieldworks that could not be ignored. German tanks could break into positions, but each local success required clearing, regrouping, and bringing forward support. The very process of fighting through the first defensive belts began to consume the time that the pincer plan required. In armored warfare, a stalled attack is not merely slower than intended, it begins to change the entire operational equation around it. The southern face created a more alarming picture for the Soviets because German formations there were able to drive farther into the defensive system. The attack from the south included some of the most powerful German armored formations available, and their advance placed real strain on Soviet command. Villages, ridges, and road junctions became stepping stones in a battle that still had the potential to become more mobile. The farther the Germans moved, the more urgent the Soviet problem became, whether to commit reserves early to stop the penetration or hold them back for a larger counterstroke. This was the kind of pressure that made Kursk a serious crisis, not a foregone conclusion. The southern battle proved that even a prepared defense could be bent hard by concentrated armor. Yet the two faces of the battle were tied together by time. The German plan required the northern and southern attacks to make progress in relation to each other. A rapid southern advance might look impressive, but if the northern arm did not also break through, the encirclement could not close. The southern spearhead would then become less like one half of a trap and more like a force pushing into an increasingly crowded and dangerous defensive depth. This is one of the reasons Kursk is so important for understanding armored operations. A tank thrust cannot be judged only by how far it moves on its own axis. It has to be judged by whether that movement serves the larger operational design. The Soviets used depth to exploit this problem. A German advance into the first and second defensive belts did not automatically equal success because the Red Army had built additional layers behind them. In the north, this depth helped hold Model's attack to limited gains and turned his assault into a struggle over fortified ground. In the south, depth allowed Vatutin's forces to absorb penetrations, shift reserves, and force the Germans to keep fighting even after breaking through forward positions. The result was a battle in which the Germans could win local engagements and still fall behind the timetable that made victory possible. Every lost hour mattered. Every disabled tank mattered. Every artillery delay mattered, because the whole operation depended on synchronized movement. The difference between north and south also helps correct a common misunderstanding of Kursk. The battle was not one uniform wall of German tanks crashing against one uniform Soviet line. It was a campaign with distinct sectors, commanders, terrain problems, and rhythms. The north was more immediately grinding, with German progress restricted early by the density of the defense and the difficulty of turning penetration into movement. The south was more dynamic, with deeper German gains and greater danger that the Soviet line might be forced open in a meaningful way. But the two sectors cannot be separated completely. The failure of one affected the meaning of success in the other, because Citadel was designed as a double envelopment, not as two independent offensives.
The logistical burden also differed across the two arms, but mattered everywhere. German armored formations needed fuel, ammunition, engineers, recovery vehicles, bridging support, and usable roads. As the attacks pressed into Soviet defenses, supply routes lengthened through damaged ground and congested lanes. Vehicles disabled by mines or mechanical failure had to be recovered or abandoned. Infantry had to keep up with tanks because armor without infantry protection could be isolated in villages, ravines, or anti-tank zones. In the north, slow progress compressed German forces into a hard fight close to their start line. In the south, deeper movement created its own strain because every mile forward increased the need to keep support moving through dangerous terrain.
Command decisions were shaped by uncertainty on both sides. German commanders had to judge whether a breakthrough was still possible, or whether they were feeding strength into a battle that had already lost its operational chance. Soviet commanders had to decide when a German gain was a crisis requiring immediate reinforcement, and when it could be managed by existing defensive depth. Reports arrived late, casualties rose, dust and smoke confused observation, and the scale of the fighting made perfect control impossible. Kursk was therefore not a clean chessboard. It was a campaign in which both sides were constantly trying to interpret movement, loss, and momentum under pressure. The two arms of the German pincer were not just attacking Soviet defenses. They were testing the ability of command systems to understand a battle too large to see clearly.
North and South together reveal the deeper lesson of Operation Citadel. German armored warfare still possessed real tactical power, but tactical power had to be translated into operational decision before Soviet depth and reserves took control of the tempo. In the north, the weaker arms struggled early, weakening the whole idea of encirclement. In the south, stronger progress created drama, but not yet decision, because penetration was not the same as freedom. The battle became a race between German movement and Soviet absorption, between the hope of closing the pincers and the reality of fighting through prepared depth. Kursk deserves its place in the history of armored warfare because it shows how the geometry of a plan can be undone by the uneven behavior of its parts. A pincer looks decisive on a map, but on the ground, both arms have to move through fire, mines, supply problems, and human limits.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.